So Rob, let's go ahead and kick this off. All right. So again, welcome to the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast. I'm really pleased to have you here with us again on the second Wednesday of each and every month during the Eastern Time Zone's noon hour, the Pacific Coast 9 a.m. hour. Go ahead and put it in your calendar as a recurring event. I'm really pleased to be here with Yakuta Poonawalla from the Golden Gate Parks Conservancy. So Yakuta, thanks so much for joining us. Lara and Alicia, thanks for introducing us. We're going to be talking about broadening the concept of community engagement. So again, thank you so much for joining us. I want to encourage you all to make liberal use of the chat box. Ask your questions. I'll keep track of them, and we will go from there. You can use either the chat or the Q&A. It doesn't matter for me. I'll keep track of them both. And then I wanted to introduce you all to the Stewardship Network. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we are a 501c3 nonprofit with an award-winning 20-year history of connecting, equipping, and mobilizing people and organizations to care for land and water in their communities. And we do that in so many different ways. So we mobilize through our member communities program, where we make collaborative ecological stewardship accessible to all. And again, as I said, we do that in so many different ways. We're all about land stewardship and ecological health. You can see so many of the different ways that we mobilize here. So not only do we mobilize, but we equip. So we remove hurdles for our member communities so they can be out in the community, pouring hours annually into our ecosystem. So we want you out on the land. And again, we do that in so many different ways. You know, we take care of some of the administrative and backbone stuff, whether it's websites or event registrations, we take care of that. So, and we then connect you all. And so we connect you in, again, so many ways. We take all of the knowledge that you've had and make sure that we share it through things like these monthly webcasts. Again, if you're new to the Stewardship Network's monthly webcast, welcome. Thank you all to your returning members. Welcome to you as well. We appreciate you taking the time, sharing your thoughts and ideas and perspectives in the chat as well. And I want to thank Yakuta again for being here. And I want to thank you all online who are financial contributors to the Stewardship Network. Your donation of $10, $10,000 helps us broadcast these free online monthly webcasts, as we've been doing for more than 15 years. As I said, back before, we've been doing this all the time. I want to give you all a little preview to what's coming up next month, where we're going to kick off our Spring Challenge 2022. So the Stewardship Network Spring Challenge 2022 is revamped, and it's going to be all about all of the ways that we connect with nature. It'll run from April to July this year. And as I say, Earth Day is my holiday because every day is Earth Day. And so we're going to make this spring challenge all about being out and connecting with nature and with each other. So stay tuned for more details about the Spring Challenge 2022. Again, Rachel, thanks so much for introducing yourself from Traverse City. Great to have the NAP team with us again as well. And from here, Yakuta, thank you for joining us. I want to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Or as they would say in my mother tongue, Gujarati, Tame kem cho, or Salam, which is also in Urdu, another language that I learned. I welcome you all and thank you for choosing to be with me and with Lisa and Rob this morning. I'm so grateful for your time, and throughout the pandemic, I've continued a tradition of bringing something into this Zoom space to make it feel real, right? Sometimes it's flowers, sometimes it's a leaf, sometimes it's a shell that I found on the beach. And today I didn't get a chance to go out. So I picked this little heart, which was given by a friend, a dear friend. It's from the Gandhi ashram in India, where I grew up. And behind this heart, it says, love all and serve all. I've been thinking a lot about what it means to lead with love, and nothing else makes sense these days. So here's an offering for each one of you, for all the work that you do. And I look forward to learning from you as much as I can during this conversation. So let's make it interactive. I invite you to share in the chat box your name, perhaps your call to share the meaning of your name or the origin of your name. And if you are familiar with the land acknowledgement, I invite you to share a land acknowledgement in the chat box. My name is Yakuta Poonawalla, and Yakut is an Arabic word which means the gemstone ruby. And so I like to think that I'm a child of the earth. And Poonawalla, which I'll explain in a in a moment. Pune is the city that I grew up in, the western part of India, and Walla is a suffix which means of Pune. And my last name has been really helping me think about where I come from, where do I belong, and what am I called to do in community stewardship and engagement work. I'm calling you from San Francisco, California. I sit here in a neighborhood called Inner Richmond. And when I look outside, I can see Monterey cypress trees, which are part of the Presidio of the Golden Gate National Parks, which is where I work. Parks and lands that were once taken care of by our native Ramatush Ohlone people, and whose presence I continue to feel through the work that I do, and from whom I am learning so much in my work here in the parks. So once again, I invite you to share a land acknowledgement or the meaning of your name. And while y'all do that, I'm gonna pull up my screen slides. So give me a moment.
And as Yakuta is doing that, fun to have everybody here from the West Coast in Seattle and Ontario and the Great Lakes in between, and Olympia, Washington, and wonderful to have you all with us. So again, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
So I can't see the chat box. So Lisa, I'm going to request you to share any questions that come up, and feel free to interrupt me. I'm really hoping this is interactive. I'd love to start this morning. It's early morning or it's afternoon for you. I would love to start with a little haiku. I'm inspired by nature and I love writing haikus. And so I'm going to make this offering this morning. So let's read it together, read it with me, and you're welcome to unmute yourself and share this space with everyone else. Listen to the earth. She whispers secrets daily, now more than ever. And as we settle in, and take a few deep breaths together, let's take a moment to indulge in some collective breathing and find the common threads between us. The natural world binds us. And perhaps you know someone in this group, or you've always wanted to meet someone in this group and never had a chance. So take a moment to say hi in the chat box, say hello, share words of inspiration or encouragement. Make a plan to meet them if possible and if safe to do so. And then take a moment to start the day with a gratitude. So if there's someone in the group that you want to share a thanks to, let's take a moment to do that. And I want to start with gratitude for Rob and Lisa for creating this space for me, this supportive space for me. And I also want to take a moment to thank a wonderful artist named Meenal Patel. I think of her as my soul sister. And a lot of the slides that you will see in my presentation today are from the artwork that she's done, and I've had the honor to witness her artwork. Okay.
You have some people who are looking forward to meeting you in person, and the people who are tuning in. Jen Hilmer, great to have you with us. The Duwamish people and the lands that they currently live on, and the Anishinaabe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi people.
Great, thank you. Can you all still see my slides?
Yes.
So during our time together, I hope to take you on what I like to call my spiritual journey in nature, where I'll share what I have learned along the way as a student, as an observer, and as a listener. My journalism professor and a dear friend, Jerry Pinto, once told me, when you're reading, you're sowing the seeds inside your brain. And right now, nothing will happen. But 10 years from now, 15 years from now, all those seeds will grow into a forest of ideas. And when you have something to think about, when you have something to make, to create, to do, to invent, you won't have to go outside. You will just have to walk through that forest of your ideas and pluck the fruit. My journey began by reading, not books, but people and nature. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. So let's keep moving. Sorry, I'm a bit slow with this. Okay, great. I could begin my story in so many different ways, but today I'm choosing to take the help of two words, insider and outsider. I grew up female in India in a conservative Muslim community known as the Dawoodi Bohras, who trace their spiritual heritage back to the Prophet Muhammad. Primarily a trading community, my ancestors moved from Yemen in the Middle East, and then first to India and then to Pakistan, and now they're all over the world. And Dawoodi Bohras have a blend of ethnic cultures. So they're Yemeni, they're Egyptian, African, Pakistani, and Indian. And in addition to the local languages that we learn in India, which is Hindi and my state language Marathi, we have our own language called Lisan al-Dawat, which is derived from Arabic and Persian, Urdu, and Gujarati. The community considers itself progressive, inclusive, and closely knit. And in my mother tongue Gujarati, there are two words that I grew up listening to very often, Poonawalla and Baharwalla. Wala is a suffix, which I told you, which means of. So in this case, Poonawalla would be insider, the person who is part of the community, and Baharwalla is someone who's the outsider, who is outside the community. And it was very clear early on to me that these words were mainly used to distinguish between a deeply rooted religious and caste system that existed not only within the boundaries of my community and within other Muslim communities, but beyond. On the left is how my community saw me, in a rida, in a traditional hijab, abiding by the rules set by a male authoritarian system and living within the strict definitions of what it means to be a woman in the community. In my early years, I led two different lives. From the outside, I was a good Muslim girl who attended the mosque and followed the very strict community laws. But from the inside, I was someone who was strong, who was courageous, and bold, and was not going to give into the systems that were imposed on her. And honestly, truly, as I started exploring the natural world, I didn't want to lead those two lives, because this is how I really saw myself, both from the inside and outside, someone who just wanted to observe flowers and birds and inspire others to do the same. And as my connection with the natural world became stronger and stronger, I found it rather strange, this play of words, right? Insider and outsider, Poonawalla, Baharwalla. And I started to ask a lot of questions to the religious authorities, to my parents, to my friends, to my extended family, and the Indian laws and systems that discriminated against people at many different levels. And I wondered if I was the one who was slowly becoming the Baharwalla, the outsider of my community. When I would come back from my time in nature, my mother was the first one to say, Tara mo par kitlu noor che, which means noor is there's this angelic glow that you get only when you've come back from a very spiritual or religious experience. And she was the first one who pointed that out. And I thought to myself, if that's what being in nature does to me, that's where I want to be. Right? This is a Varli painting done by the Varli tribes of Maharashtra, the state that I grew up in. And their paintings, if you notice and observe very carefully, depict a very collective way of living, centering the natural world in everything that they do. And I've stared at this spiral for hours and hours and learned my very first lesson from the Varli tribe of Maharashtra. How do I live in a community when no one is inside or outside the circle, right? If the earth was truly round and not flat, like the Varlis depict in this painting, I wanted my communities to be like this painting. And it was my search for a path that went beyond these simplistic definitions of insider and outsider that really guides the work I do in the parks now. Bell Hooks, if you've read any of her books, in her book, Belonging, A Culture of Place, uses the term, the geography of the heart. I followed this heart map that Bell Hooks talks about to the forests and rivers and mountain communities of India, which is where I had my first awakenings of the human nature interconnectedness. That feeling of being one not separate from the earth, that feeling of oneness and belonging was the first time I felt that feeling. And that's when I learned my first lesson. Cultivate a relationship and science will follow. And you will find the answers. Research started telling me this, books told me this, stories and conversations with the caretakers and the real stewards of the lands told me this. And when I asked the monks of the mountains, where I spent a lot of time back in India, they handed me the colorful Tibetan prayer flags and asked me to listen to the earth and its elements. And that is what I keep with me close to my heart. I have my Tibetan prayer flags hanging here as inspiration, and I keep asking the questions and remember the monks who reminded me to not worry about the weeds of the mind. 12 years ago, when I moved to the United States, thousands of miles away from my home, I made my first trip to the national park, which is Yosemite National Park. If you haven't been here, I invite you to. It's a magical place. And of course, I had to pose with the famous, the popular, the respectable John Muir, whom I had read so much about. In my first few months here, as I read about John Muir and many other conservationists and environmentalists and spoke to many elders and ancestors and experts in these fields, I realized that here too, I was seen as an outsider, as a woman of color, surrounded by very similar inequities that I had seen and experienced in India. I'll share two examples with you. There was this one time when I was leading a community stewardship program at Land's End in San Francisco. It was a beautiful sunny spring morning. And we were doing some habitat restoration work, pulling some weeds, and a white Caucasian man stops by to ask what we were doing. And as of course, the leader of the group, I felt the responsibility to go and chat with him. And I love chatting with people and I love telling stories. So with much excitement, as always, I respond to him, we're removing invasive weeds and there's radish and thistle and we're going to plant during the winter season and it's going to look beautiful. And look at all these little beautiful flowers coming up. And I threw in a bunch of information, convinced that he would be impressed by the work we're doing. He pauses, looks at me in the eye and responds, so are you just an invasive species like these radish and thistle? Another example. I was running on the trails of Mount Am in California in Marin County, and my husband and I were making the most of a beautiful rainy day. And a gentleman surprised to see us running on the trails because no one was around. It was a rainy day and it was quiet, and he and his wife were around, and it was me and my husband. And he looks at us and he says, you Indian techies outside getting your dose of wilderness, I see. Oof, I thought. My clothes looked the part of a trail runner, but oops, my skin didn't, unfortunately. So I respond back to him and say, hey, I actually work for the national parks. A confused and somewhat curious response, which park? Oh, just the Golden Gate National Park, the lands we're on, Mount Tam. And then of course, he becomes slightly defensive and starts to ask me questions. And so I tell him about all the wildlife monitoring projects we're doing. I tell him about the endangered species we are taking care of. I throw in a bunch of scientific plant names that I knew. And he smiles. And he responds, wow, I didn't know all this was happening. This is in my backyard, but I didn't know this was all happening. And once the confusion about identities and all the assumptions and biases and stereotypes were out of the way, we could actually start to have a normal conversation at a human-to-human level. And we talked about the coyotes we saw on the trail, and we discussed which trail we were going to take. And that's how we built a relationship. So why do I share these pieces of my life with you? Because these are pieces of my life that I pick and take inspiration from. These are pieces of my life that guide me in my work. These are pieces of my life that help me engage with the lands and help me understand those who engage with the lands and those who come to the parks, whether as a visitor, as a steward, as a volunteer, as a passerby, someone who comes with the hope of building a connection with the lands. And so if I don't understand my story and myself, and if I can't create a space to share my story and my pieces of life, I cannot understand how to guide these people who come and meet me every day in my life.
Yakuta, thank you for sharing those stories. There's one question comes in from the chat. Were you able to forgive him in the moment?
Yes, yes. I have been practicing forgiveness, and that's why I was able to. And I think I'm always in the park so full of joy to share. And that is the power of parks, and that is the power of the natural world. And so I really tap into that feeling. And so even in that moment, when I go back in that moment, I think more than forgiveness, I just felt sad. And then immediately I was like, okay, there's work to do.
Right.
Right.
Yes. Keep showing up.
Keep showing up. Keep showing up, and there's work to do. And these are the 3 questions I wanted to share with you all, which I've pinned up next to my workstation on the wall here. And these are the questions I read all the time, because these are the questions that guide me. And so I'm actually going to, if Lisa, would you like to unmute and read the first one?
If nature has been a vehicle through which I see, learn, and experience the world, how do I speak the language of nature to bring others to have the same experiences as me?
And how do I build spaces that center compassion for all beings, irrespective of their caste, their class, their race, their gender, or their ethnicity? And how do I create experiences that embody this interconnectedness that I have been feeling between humans, nature, culture, and spirituality? And I do this by thinking about us as a team. I do this by thinking about the natural world as my team. I do this by thinking about the people I interact with as a team. We work together as a team. The land speaks, or so it seems. Unidos con mucha fortaleza, escuchamos la canción de la naturaleza to build a community that is the dream. And so when I think about those 2 gentlemen who approached me, I have to remind myself that to build a community, that is the dream. And no one is outside that circle. So how do we do this? I'm going to share a few examples of how we've been experimenting and listening and observing and co-designing programs with our communities in mind. Coming from a culture that often views working in the outdoors as nothing more than unskilled manual labor or work that is done by poor people, I was very aware of the fact that different cultures perceive nature and parks in different ways. So how do we go beyond that habitat restoration and conservation work or monitoring work to co-design programs that are relevant, inclusive, and meaningful to the diverse communities that are coming out to the parks or would like to come out to the parks but haven't had a chance to do so? This on the left is an Indian couple who approached us, and they wanted to kickstart their wedding celebrations by doing a habitat restoration project. It was something that came from them. We didn't suggest it to them. And so yes, I said yes. And that's me officiating their wedding at the parking lot of one of the park sites at a habitat restoration volunteer program. So instead of the grand Indian celebrations, we put the families to work with handpicks and weed bags and mulch. And I remember family and friends came from all over the world. Some came directly from the airport. And of course, they were surprised to see me as their leader, as someone who looks like them and talks like them. And so I reach out to the aunties on the right and I say, hey, auntie, kem cho? Tame kem cho? Because I heard them speak my mother tongue. And I said, yes, that's how I'm going to build a connection with them. And of course, they were shocked again. And they had a big smile then, because the shock became a smile. And then the next 3 hours was spent in building those finding those commonalities and building that connection, understanding stewardship, understanding work that is done by very poor people in India and low-income communities in India, and building a respect for this work. And hours later, I got hugs and a promise to spread the message of stewardship back home in India. And I thought to myself, wow, we had just opened a new door for them. I had just opened a new door for them. Power of opening and closing circles. I'm sure all of you have been a part of a circle. And as I said and shared earlier, the power of circles has been huge for me. On the right is a photo of the community I grew up in, where early on we learned to eat from the same large plates sitting in a circle. And when we sat together in a circle, we would chat, we would learn about each other. And in that circle, the similarities between us outweighed the differences, right? Giving rise to greater compassion. And so in our programs, we created a tradition of always starting in a circle, as you can see on the left, and then always ending in a circle. So when we start in a circle, we set a collective intention of collaboration. And then when we leave the circle, we set the stage for a reflection and something that they can take back into their communities. How do we create a sense of belonging? We create a sense of belonging by celebrating birthdays, family traditions, graduations, job promotions. All that matters to our communities matters to us. And it is these personal touches that we started adding to our habitat restoration programs by bringing food that matters to our communities, by bringing party hats, and bringing balloons and sharing those moments of joy with them, bringing joy and fun into habitat restoration, whether it was organizing the food for them or inviting them to bring something that is special to them, or just creating that space for an important day in their lives. Ecological and social healing is something that we're all talking about. How do we come out of this pandemic and heal ourselves and heal our earth and heal our communities? And this is something that we started trying a few years ago when we started to think about how healing can be that first step in building a relationship with the lands and with ourselves. And I go back to the monks who I had met in the Spiti Valley of India, where I had mentioned earlier to you all, the monks would tell me, accept the weeds of the mind, Yakuta, and allow the wind and the mountains to heal you. And that was such a powerful message. And I continue to carry it with me in our programs, where I'm no expert, but as my spiritual journey is established, and I think about all the benefits and all the gifts that I receive from my spiritual journey, can I share that with my community through the programs that we create? So we started having meditation programs where we would start with a meditation or end with a meditation for 10 or 15 minutes after doing the work, and creating invitations and prompts where we would ask our communities how they felt. And introducing aspects of different cultures and different meditation practices into this work has really helped people take their health and wellness in their own hands, and not always feeling the need to rush to a doctor. But sometimes I have had volunteers who said, oh, we were just not feeling well, or we were having a terrible day and we decided to come to program. And that is where the healing begins. That is where the healing begins, right? These were some of my favorite programs. A few years ago, again, as we were starting these meditation in the parks programs, I started to read a book by Larry Yang called Awakening Together, a spiritual practice of inclusivity and community. And Larry Yang says, culture is what begins to connect the dots. Culture is what begins to connect the dots to show people that, yes, this practice is for me too. So as we were bringing culture and ritual and ecology, and as someone who's grown up with festivals and a lot of cultural traditions and faiths and belief systems, I asked myself, why not bring it to habitat restoration programs? Why not? Why celebrate all these festivals at home when you have the most magical transformational backdrop that you can? But the invitation was an important one to our communities, and how we invited them and how we implemented this in our programs was really, really crucial. And so here on the left, you can see, I didn't grow up in this community, but we wanted to celebrate Chinese New Year. So we asked one of our leaders who celebrated, one of our interns who celebrated Chinese New Year, to come up with this idea. And we started to plant plants, and then everyone tied a little wish to the plant. And they would keep coming back week after week to make sure that their wish was still there and that their plant was still there. And now years later, they keep coming back to think about the plant that they had planted and the wish that they had planted on this site. And I think when I think about these rituals and traditions and beliefs and religious festivals, I also think about how these can be barriers, right? These religious traditions and festivals can also come from a place of exclusion for many other religious beliefs and cultures and traditions. And so how do we bring people of different faiths together to actually start having a conversation and feel pride of the cultures that they come from and learn a little bit about the cultures that they come from?
Yakuta, Emily asked a good question. So as you said in the Chinese New Year one, you asked somebody who celebrated Chinese New Year. But Emily asked, how would someone draw the line between kind of the incorporations that you've led and the appropriation of rituals and other items of cultural significance? So how, maybe just whether here now or just weave that in.
I love that question. And I would say the first step to doing that, and I've thought a lot about cultural appropriation. When I brought the Tibetan prayer flag back from India here, and I saw a lot of Tibetan prayer flags hanging in a lot of homes here, the first question was, wait, isn't that weird? Isn't that awkward? Like, why do people have Tibetan prayer flags? And then I realized that I have one too, but for some reason I felt okay because it was given to me by a monk, right? But that still makes me uncomfortable. And so going back to the Chinese New Year celebration, the question that we asked ourselves is, who leads that program? Who facilitates that program is an important one. I did not lead that program because I did not come from the community. And so I don't feel like I can do justice to that. But giving that power, stepping back and letting my colleague who is from the community take that space and dream and visualize this program in a way that they felt right to represent their community and their culture was the first step in creating this program. And so I think the best we can do is not always feel like we have to lead, and taking that step back and allowing other leaders from within the communities to take lead and to design the program in a way that feels right to them. And then the question of how can we be in right relationship with these leaders and show up in a way that we are allies, and show up in a way that we can show respect and honor this process and system. The next few examples are actually great and can connect back to the question that Emily asked. Was it Emily? Okay. Yeah, and as I thought through a lot of these programmings, what felt right was celebrating and implementing a lot of the cultural traditions that I grew up with so that I could be honest and authentic. And so the next few examples are of festivals that we celebrate in DIWALI. Holi in the Parks is a festival that marks the beginning of spring and the harvest season in India. And so we connected this festival to our spring wildflower season, where a lot of wildflowers start popping up, and we did a wildflower walk. We talked about pollinators. We talked about the importance of having local indigenous plants, the relationship between plants and pollinators. And we also brought in some of the cultural traditions. So you can see here, we did a wildflower walk, and then we connected it to just celebrations with powdered color. This was homemade powdered color with red chili powder and turmeric. And every program that we did, we tried to connect it back to the natural world. So in this program, we brought a book called, it is by Vijaya Nagarajan, and she talks about this ritual called kolam, which is celebrated, or a design that is done in India every morning at dawn by women. So you can see on the left. And they use rice flour to do this design. And every morning, it's these intricate designs outside their homes. And because it's rice flour, it's eaten by a lot of the insects. So in a couple of hours, as life awakens in those cities, the designs disappear. And it's a practice in impermanence for these communities. And so we brought the book out by Vijaya Nagarajan and talked about kolam and what it means to see impermanence in our natural world, and also connected back to pollinators and spring and the impermanence of those seasons. And of course, we had to do the pollinator dance. So here on the right, you can see we indulged in some dancing. We brought out some scarves and became monarch butterflies and lots of other butterflies that people were excited to become. And we just channeled those butterflies and pollinators and celebrated Rangoli and managed to do a lot of habitat restoration work during this program. And then, of course, here, let me play this video to just bring some cheer and joy. This is a snippet from the dancing that we did.
I love that, Yakuta, right? I mean, that work, it's so, the joy and the celebration of students is just so powerful, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we're trying to bring more dancing into our programs, like even after doing a lot of hand weeding or mulching, can we just get into a dance and we'll play some music and just dance together and bring that joy and fun, especially right now when there's a lot of heartbreaking conversations that people are having in their lives about climate change. There's climate anxiety, there's climate fear. There's just a lot of fear coming out of the pandemic as well. So how can we bring moments of joy into this work?
That's right. And Lauren says that looks like such a fun program, channeling our inner pollinators, our inner butterflies. Love it.
Yeah, it definitely was one of the special programs. And I have a box of scarves now, which I carry with me to programs, and we burst out into dancing like pollinators pretty often now. It's becoming a tradition. Diwali in the parks. So this is a special festival again in India, and it's a festival of lights and hope. So we thought, how can we bring what in the natural world brings light and hope? And we thought of our planting season. So we celebrated Diwali during the beginning of our planting season, where we made an invitation to our communities, especially our South Asian communities, to come celebrate Diwali outside and plant a plant to build light and hope and joy in our parks and in our natural world. And planting was that symbol of hope and spreading cheer to our lands and within our communities. And as I mentioned, we always have some sort of interpretive walk or talk during these programs and try to find metaphors that help people connect their culture to nature. So this one, because it talks about light, bringing light, we also wanted to bring attention to darkness and how often in our human world, we think of darkness as something that's evil or bad or scary. And we wanted to bring attention to all the life that is alive in darkness. So again, all our pollinators, the owls, the bats, all the local night blooming flowers, we did a short interpretive talk on life that is alive at night. And so it was a really fun connection to make about lightness and the importance of darkness in our lives, and not always feeling that we have to run away from the darkness, and that there's always a moon that will shine light during this darkness. And I have another video to share from a participant, so I'm going to play that.
Yes.
Hi. Do you have a name for your plant?
Yeah, calling him Patata.
Oh, that's a cool name.
That's like firecrackers in Hindi, and since we're celebrating Diwali.
Oh. That's awesome.
Yes.
So what brought you out today?
I was succulent.
I've moved to the States like 6 years ago, and I always miss Diwali back home.
Oh.
And this year, to see like a community come together and celebrate it,
Yeah.
got me excited. So I got me
Can we take these with us or leave them?
here for Diwali.
That is a good
That's awesome.
plan. Do you think we should
Oh,
take
thanks for
that?
coming out.
Of course, I love it.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yakuta, when we first met, one of the things that we talked about, I was like, oh, I can't wait to get to know this woman. But it's, it's that piece of this stewardship is accessible to all of us in many different ways. And what makes the connection, right? So you might not feel like, oh, I want to go out to a stewardship workday. I don't know, am I inside or am I outside that? I haven't done that. And so where am I in that? And providing those different avenues. And so Diwali brought this person out because she missed it from home and missing Diwali. And yeah.
That's so true, Lisa. And that's really the hope and intention, that we can meet people where they're at and really expand what our stewardship and habitat restoration programs look like. And it hasn't been easy. We don't always get to the I'm sure all of you have your priority spreadsheets. Like at this season, we have to get this work done, and we're so overwhelmed by a lot of the work that we often can't get done. And so we've been working with our colleagues to understand those priorities, but also sometimes have to take a step back and say, hey, this is a priority in this season, but if we want to engage this community, we might not be able to get everything done in those 3 hours, because we want them to first build that connection and then hope that they will keep coming back. And they do come back. I strongly believe that they do come back, and I've witnessed it over and over again.
And I can imagine so many of you online here are doing these same stewardship programs. And that's the thing that you love, is, engaging those relationships with people and helping them make those relationships with the land and the water. And then Yakuta, I bet I would be coming back to your work days as well.
You're always welcome. And all of you are always welcome. I would love to host you all here in the Parks Conservancy.
Yeah.
Okay. A few more examples. So thank you for being such good listeners and so patient, and also being so interactive. Thank you for all the messages in the chat, which I can't see, but I promise I will at the end of this program. This one was the most special program for me because I grew up in a Muslim community. And this was actually almost a selfish move, because I missed Eid and I was so nostalgic. I was like, hey, who's my community here? And as someone who had to start from scratch and had no relatives or friends, my volunteers, my community that came to the parks, my work colleagues became my community. So it was very easy to celebrate this festival in a habitat restoration program. We invited Muslim communities. We partnered with an organization called Green Muslims. And again, going back to how do I connect nature and culture, it was very easy to do that, because as a Muslim growing up, we were always taught the 5 pillars of Islam. If you read about the 5 pillars of Islam, and every Muslim is supposed to abide by and fulfill these 5 pillars in their lifetime. So at our Eid celebration, we talked about those 5 pillars, and I'll quickly share what those mean. So the first pillar is faith, to have faith. And when I think about our restoration work, especially at this site, we started working at this site 10 or 20 years ago. And we had to have that faith initially, that when we plant the plants, when we mulch, when we weed, when we do all these restoration, when we take all these restoration initiatives in our hands, the faith that this will work, something will come. The species will come back, the birds will come and nest, the plants will thrive. And so that was the first message we shared about faith and one of the pillars of Islam, and how do we create that welcoming place in our communities by having that faith. The second one is prayer, which is all Muslims are expected to say their prayers 3 times a day or 5 times a day. And I remember this morning when I called my mom and wished her, and I said, Eid Mubarak, Ma. And she said, oh, what are you doing? Did you make shir kurma? And I said, yeah, I made shir kurma, and I'm going to Land's End, and I'm going to lead this habitat restoration program, and we're going to celebrate Eid. And that's my way of celebrating Eid. And that's my way of saying my prayer, being with my community, and taking care of our lands. And so when I shared this example with our community, they could relate to that, because there are so many different ways of praying, and prayer and being in the natural world together can also be a form of prayer. Witnessing a sunrise, witnessing a sunset together can be a form of prayer. The third one we talked about was fasting. So during the month of Ramadan, all Muslims are expected to fast. And fasting teaches you patience. And so we asked our communities, where do you see patience in the natural world? And it was very obvious. There was a volunteer who's been coming out since the 90s, and he talked about patience. And he talked about how he's had to be so patient because there's no instant gratification in this work. And he had to be patient to see all those migratory birds come through the Pacific Flyway and think about and learn about patience from them, how they have to stop to find food and water and then travel thousands of miles, and what kind of patience does that take? So that was a beautiful connection he was able to make, and we were all able to make so many different connections that day. And then the last one being Hajj, which is a pilgrim that all Muslims are expected to do. So we again talked about Hajj and pilgrim and who in nature makes those pilgrims, right? Again, going back to migratory birds, people who do spiritual walks and what they learn from it. Hiking is a form of pilgrim. And so how do we connect hiking to a pilgrim, to a spiritual journey? And alms, which is zakat, where each Muslim is supposed to give a certain percentage of their income to charity, where we talked about how our volunteers are not doing charitable work, but they're doing honorable work. They're giving their time. That is zakat. That is paying respect and giving your energy and giving the gift of time to the natural world. And so it was a beautiful way to celebrate Eid. And many of our Muslim communities for the first time were able to see themselves in this park, in the natural world. And of course, the fun element was we brought out henna cones and did some artwork inspired by what we saw in the natural world around there. So here you can see some folks enjoying henna art during a program. Okay. This is another one similar to the Chinese New Year, Lisa, where I took a step back and I had a colleague, Aurora Perez, who built a beautiful partnership with the Latino Outdoors. And that time the chapter here in San Francisco was just gaining momentum. And so we created an altar at the trailhead and asked our participants to bring photos of people they had lost in their lives. And right at the trailhead, we created this altar, and then they carried the photos with them and planted a plant in the memory of someone they had lost. And so that was another beautiful way of connecting Dia de los Muertos in the parks, and taking a step back and allowing our colleagues from their communities to feel that pride of their culture and bringing it into the parks. Here's a really heartwarming note. So Mojave has been experiencing homelessness for many years. And we used to see him walking around at one of our park sites, and he would never show up to our programs. But one day, that day when we were dancing at the HOLI festival, he saw us dancing and just joined in and became part of the group and started dancing with us, and then ate a little bit of food and then said, "Hey, can I join you?" I said, "Yes, of course." And then we gave him a handpick, and it took him months. He would be there all the time watching us, observing us. But because we were there regularly, consistently showing up, and he was able to witness the power of community, he showed up. And then he sent this note, this beautiful poetry. He handed this journal to the Lookout Visitor Center folks, who gave it to me. And these are some notes and writings from his experiences in the program.
And Yakuta, what you created was for a long time, I bet he was thinking, I'm outside, right? I'm outside. And just as you started, am I inside or am I outside? And so creating that space where, no, we're all in this, and we are all part of stewardship. Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes just being there, right? We never asked him to join the program. We never did. We would watch him. We would talk about him. Everyone knew Mojave. We didn't know his name at the time. But we let him come to us when he felt comfortable. And unhoused homelessness and unhoused folks are in the parks, especially in the pandemic. We've seen a huge increase, and I'm sure many of you have felt the same way, especially in urban areas, urban city parks. And we're learning what it means to have unhoused folks, and what does it mean to be on public lands. And do habitat restoration and conservation work while you have unhoused folks sharing this space with us. We talk about sharing space with other species, like the birds and the bees. What does it mean to share space with unhoused folks? And it's a very complex problem. Right? We don't have answers, but we're creating a space to have those difficult conversations.
these are some themes that we're exploring. So poetry is close to my heart, and so is plays and puppet shows and things that I've dreamt of doing. And these programs have a lot of potential, and we're still trying them out in different ways. Inspired by a church group that volunteered with us a few years ago, we're thinking about spaces we can create where a church group can come and do a choir during a habitat restoration program. And having spent 12 years of my school life studying in a convent school in India, I've learned a little bit from the nuns, right? How do you create safe spaces for church groups and groups that regularly visit the mosque or a temple? And how can you make some of their practices become part of habitat restoration or conservation programs? And on the right, you can see we were testing out a street play. Street plays are pretty common in many different parts of the world, where you use or occupy a public space, a street, a busy street, and then you just put up a play or something that has a social, powerful message. And I think in this play, there was a very interesting conversation happening between a blue jay and a coyote bush and an Indian paintbrush. So imagine that. These are the last few stories I want to share. And I wanted to I was thinking of starting with this, but really, I shared so many examples with you all about things that we're trying and experimenting and thinking intentionally about. And one of these questions that I've been asking myself and many of my colleagues too, is that not everyone sees the parks the way you and I do. Right? Not everyone looks at the natural world the way you and I do. And so how do we come together and really understand how our communities see the natural world or don't see the natural world? And so on the left, this is a Mandarin speaking group that came from China and was visiting the national parks. And of course, the typical thing to do would be bring out our beautiful park maps and show them all our cool species and show them the dolphins and the whales and the coyotes and the birds. And we decided not to do that. We're like, let's print a large map of national parks in China. Let's learn about the species that they see and interact with on a daily basis. Let's show them that, and let's start from there. And we didn't know anything about the national parks. We didn't know the species, so it was good research for us. And they were surprised. But that surprise soon was transformed into a sense of belonging, because they're like, oh yeah, let us show you this. Let us show you this. Like, this is the trip that I took with my grandmother. This is the trip that I took with my family. And then we pulled out a map of the Golden Gate National Parks and started to make the connections. Oh, look, you have this species, we have this species too. It just looks a little different. You have this flower and we have this flower too. They look a little different, but they're still flowers from the same family. And we couldn't speak the language, but the rest of the program was led in signs and using this map and just gestures of love and intention and care. And it was such a wonderful program. And then there's another example similar to that, which reminds me of how people don't see the parks the way you and I do. We had a group that was from different embassies from different parts of the world, and they were visiting San Francisco. And so we decided to host them and do a service project with them. And there were people from Bangladesh and Bosnia and the Middle East and Japan. And this gentleman from Bosnia looked at the flags that we had put up when we were planting. And he asked me what those flags were. And I said, oh, they're just little baby plants. We put them as markers. And he said, when I look at those flags, I think of mines. And that brings up really difficult thoughts right now for me. And he didn't want to engage in the work after that. And he just had to take a step back. And we allowed space for that. And so that was another learning moment for us and for my team, of how parks are not seen the way you and I do see them. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath because I can go on and on.
I know, it's good stuff, right?
We have a few minutes left, and I wanted to end with, of course, I'm sure many of you have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And so I'm going to share a line that she says in her book in Braiding Sweetgrass. It's as if we can see the world It's as if we can see the world we want to live in just over time's horizon. It's as if we can see the world we want to live in just over time's horizon. The question is, how do we get there? Right? How do we get there? We get there by collaborating consciously. We get there by asking ourselves hard questions. All the work that I've shared with you wouldn't be possible if I didn't have the support and the love and the care from the Parks Conservancy and the colleagues I work with, the volunteers I work with, my mentors, my guides. All of these people are ready to be bold. All of these people are willing to do the hard work, to address the complexities, to address our complex history, to address issues of equity and justice, to address all the harm that is done over the years, working on stolen lands and being able to tell those stories that have been invisible takes a lot of effort and emotional labor. And I'm really grateful that I work with colleagues who are ready to do that hard work and address the internal shift that needs to happen and the external shift, right? There's work that needs to happen at the personal level. There's work that needs to happen at the institutional level by challenging the power dynamics that we see, by getting board buy-in and leadership buy-in, by changing the way we hire our staff, by changing the way our programs look, by spending time thinking about what a community-centered approach can look like, by creating values and community agreements and understandings. So there are so many ways that shift is slowly happening, that internal and external shift that is happening. We have a safety committee, we have an equity and justice committee, and everyone is pitching in. Everyone is pitching in to support each other and to do this work. And so I'm just through these examples, I'm just representing a lot of folks who are doing the thinking and coming together and dreaming and visioning what our future stewardship movement can look like. And Lisa here has been a huge inspiration for me. And I'm so glad that I've met you, Lisa, on this path, because I continue to learn from you about what the future of our stewardship movement can look like. It really takes a village to make a radical shift happen, right? And so we are that village, and I consider each one of you, 40 of you today present here, part of that village. And now it's time to think about how community stewardship and engagement are not separate. They're not separate, and there are so many pathways to connection, right? I'm going to leave you with this book. I'm reading a series of books called Kinship by the Center for Humans and Nature. And it's 5 books. One is Planet, Place, Partners, Practice, and then People. And I think about our community stewardship and engagement work as bringing all of these together, right? How do we bring all these together? How do we start to think of our people and our planet as relatives, like our indigenous communities did and continue to see, and develop a sense of kinship? So how do we move from stewardship to kinship, right? That is a question, and that is the work that is ahead of us. And I feel like hope is an active feeling, and community stewardship gives me hope. It truly gives me hope. So I started with love, and I'm going to end with love. So here's another haiku for you all. And you're all welcome to unmute, and let's read it together, because we have work to do. Love is in the air for our people and planet. Steward and engage. Thank you all. Such an honor to be in the company of each one of you. I'm sure our paths will cross sometime in some part of the world. And I really hope they do, because I know you're doing beautiful, magical work. And I just wish you all the best. May we steward the lands together. May the flowers bloom. May the birds chirp. May we be filled with love and joy together.
Yakuta, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I want to thank you all online who've been part of us together for the last hour. Really appreciate everything that you shared, both online and here, Yakuta, with you. Just an honor to be able to spend the hour with you all. Again, Rob, thanks for the behind the scenes work. We'll be back next Wednesday, the second Wednesday of the month. We'll be looking at prairie restorations and grassland birds. And so talking about that on the second Wednesday of the month. Again, look for the revamped Stewardship Network Spring Challenge 2022. I look forward to engaging you with all of that, and enjoy, take care, stay safe, be well.